The exact second I stopped begging my family for basic decency was when my brother lifted a cream-colored envelope over a room full of champagne glasses and told 83 guests that I was the reason his engagement had been under stress. I'm Nora Whitmore, 35, and the envelope he was smiling with contained a photocopy of my fertility clinic invoice, my medication list, and the balance I still owed after a failed IVF cycle, $11,480.17, highlighted in yellow like a joke everyone was supposed to understand. My mother had given it to him. She was sitting 10 feet away in a navy silk dress, nodding along as if turning my private medical records into dinner entertainment was a normal family correction. They did it between the main course and the toasts, which was somehow the cruelest part, because it meant they had timed my humiliation for maximum attention. If all they had wanted was to embarrass me, I would have walked out and never spoken to them again. But there was a much bigger reason they needed me ashamed that night, and by then I had already brought the paperwork that could end all of it. The room was one of those expensive old Boston spaces that tries very hard to look effortless. Tall windows, cream drapes, candlelight in ribbed glass, white orchids climbing up metal arches behind the sweetheart table. Everything smelled faintly of roses and polish and money. The servers had just cleared the plates from the sea-base course. A jazz trio was taking 5. My brother Luke had one hand around a microphone and the other around a crystal tumbler, performing sincerity the way some men perform competence, loudly enough that people confuse it for the real thing. He said, "Before we go any further, I think it's important to acknowledge that family life can be complicated." Then he laughed lightly like he was smoothing over something small. "Nora's had a difficult year. We all know that. The leave from work, the treatments, the debt, the emotional spirals. So if she seemed a little intense about tonight, I hope everyone can extend grace." That was the first blow. Not because he said I'd had a difficult year. I had. But because he said it in that tone people use when they want to sound kind while stripping you in public. Then he opened the envelope. The paper made a dry snapping sound in the microphone. Everyone heard it. He held up the invoice from Fairmont Reproductive Medicine like it was a receipt for bad judgment, not the private remains of the hardest year of my life. I saw the clinic logo. I saw my own name. I saw the dosage notation from a prescription I had never discussed with anyone outside my doctor, my pharmacist, and one close friend. Someone at table 6 actually leaned sideways to get a better look. And my mother did nothing. If you know that feeling, when the people who taught you what family means decide your pain is theirs to display, stay with me. Sometimes the strongest thing you do is not raising your voice. Sometimes it's deciding in full view of everyone that a door is closing and it will never open again. I didn't reach for the paper. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him to stop. What I remember most clearly is my father's fountain pen inside my clutch, pressing against the leather like a small, solid bone. Black lacquer, gold clip, tiny scratch near the cap from the year. He carried it loose in a briefcase with house keys. After he died, I kept it because it was the only thing of his that still felt like his hand had just left it. I had signed hospice forms with that pen, insurance authorizations, property tax filings, trust acknowledgments. My mother liked to say Luke got our father's charm and I got his paperwork. She meant it as a joke. It wasn't one. In our family, there was a phrase for any moment I asked a reasonable question. Don't make this about you. If Luke forgot to repay me for something expensive I had fronted temporarily, and I asked about it a month later, don't make this about you. If my mother handed me another folder of documents after I had already spent my Sunday balancing her accounts and calling the insurance company, don't make this about you. If I pointed out that my name was missing from a family reservation or a holiday card or a dinner speech after I had done half the work behind it, don't make this about you. It was less a sentence than a household tranquilizer. It could flatten anger, erase labor, and turn any protest into proof of selfishness in under 5 seconds. By the night of the engagement party, I had heard it for so many years that sometimes I caught myself apologizing before I had even finished a sentence. That party should have mattered to me for good reasons. Luke is 3 years younger than I am. When we were children, I was the one who zipped his winter coat, signed his report card folders when our mother forgot, and sat on the floor outside his bedroom the year he broke his ankle because he was 12 and suddenly afraid to sleep alone. He was beautiful in the easy way some people are. The right kind of careless, the kind other people read as confidence. Teachers forgave him. Girlfriends repaired him. My mother built entire philosophies around him. If I am honest, some part of me never stopped wanting him to turn into the kind of brother I had been to him. Instead, he grew into the kind of man who mistook rescue for background noise. The engagement party had been planned in under 10 weeks, which already told me everything I needed to know about the tone of it. Luke and Vanessa Hale had been together 8 months. She worked in development for a museum. Her father sat on 3 nonprofit boards and owned a private equity firm that pretended not to be aggressive. Her mother chaired charity luncheons and pronounced the word vulgar, like it was a diagnosis. They weren't aristocrats, just rich enough to curate the illusion of old ease. My family loved them instantly. Not Vanessa exactly. The Hales. The invitations alone made that obvious. Heavy ivory stock with deckled edges, blind embossing, hand-calligraphed guest envelopes. Luke had sent me a photograph the day they arrived from the stationer with the caption, "Clean, right?" Under it, my mother had replied, "We need to keep everything elegant." Mine came 3 days later and said Nora Whitmore plus guest. No sister of the groom. No handwritten note. No acknowledgement that I was the person who had spent the previous 18 months handling almost every administrative detail of our father's death, our mother's finances, and the family trust Luke barely understood but wanted access to every time a bill arrived. Just plus guest. It sounds small when I say it now. That was how it started with my family. Small enough to make me feel foolish for noticing. A +1 where relationship should have been. A missing place at the tasting. My name omitted from the group text where Vanessa's mother coordinated family photos. The kind of injuries you can't quite prove were intentional, which is exactly why they work so well. The truth is, by then I was already caring too much to dismiss details. My father died on October 14th, 2 years before the engagement party, from complications after a stroke that should have killed him the first time but didn't. He lived another 9 months after that first ambulance ride, long enough for me to understand what caregiving really costs when the people around you keep calling it love to avoid calling it labor. I cut my hours at the hospital where I worked in compliance. I drove him to rehab. I fought claims denials. I learned how to decipher benefits language while sitting in plastic chairs beside infusion pumps and televisions permanently tuned to muted daytime news. Luke visited when he could make it look meaningful. He brought coffee. He posted one tasteful photograph of their clasped hands with a caption about gratitude. My mother cried when other people were in the room and became brisk the moment they left. When my father's speech first started slipping, he asked me to bring him his fountain pen. He couldn't write much by then. His hand shook, but he still wanted it beside him whenever paperwork came in. Ink is commitment, he told me once, looking at a hospice packet with the tired fury of a man who resented needing forms to exist in his own dying. Don't sign anything unless you could defend it in daylight. That sentence lived in me. After he died, it turned out he had built daylight into more documents than anyone realized. He'd set up a modest but carefully structured trust. The Arlington house, the small Cape cottage in Truro that had been in his family for years, an investment account he meant primarily for my mother's housing and medical costs, and specific rules around discretionary distributions. Nothing lavish. We were comfortable, not dynastic. My father had been a tax attorney with a religious belief in paper trails and a suspicious view of family sentiment when money was involved. He named my mother primary income beneficiary and me co-trustee with a corporate fiduciary if any conflict arose. Luke was a remainder beneficiary, but discretionary distributions to him required trustee approval and certain debt disclosures because at 30, he still carried the blast radius of a failed restaurant venture and an unpaid state tax lien my father had quietly settled once already. My father loved Luke. He just knew him. My mother hated that arrangement before the funeral flowers had even wilted. Not openly. She was smarter than that, but the resentment sat underneath everything. "You always did know how to get your father's confidence," she said the first time I asked her to stop using the trust debit card for groceries unrelated to the house. That was the first time I heard her use the soft, injured voice she would later perfect, the one that turned accountability into cruelty, the one that made every fact feel like an attack. Luke learned from her. Or maybe they learned from each other. For the first year after my father died, I kept telling myself they were grieving badly, not acting deliberately. That's the lie responsible daughters tell because the alternative is too destabilizing. I handled the attorney meetings, the inventory of assets, the sale of my father's office furniture, the trust account statements, the insurance disbursements, the back and forth with the town assessor over the Cape property valuation. I paid the homemade out of my own checking account 1 month when a transfer was delayed, because my mother sounded so tired on the phone. I covered Luke's accountant bill once because he said he couldn't finalize something without it, and you know how mom gets when paperwork stacks up. It was $1,840. Then another $620 for a contractor he had hired to inspect the Truro deck, because Vanessa liked the ocean view and Luke had started talking about what we could maybe do with the place. He said he'd reimburse me after bonus season. Bonus season came and went. Anytime I pushed, my mother would say, "Nora, please, don't make this about you." I heard it while cooking for her after her knee replacement. I heard it while driving back from probate court. I heard it the night I sat at her kitchen table explaining why she could not just gift Luke the Cape Cottage out of a trust governed by distribution rules and tax consequences. She folded a dish towel slowly and said, "Your brother is trying to build a life," as if I were what stood in the way of life happening. Around that same time, my own life cracked in a way I had kept almost entirely private. I had been engaged once years before Luke met Vanessa. His name was Aaron. He was the sort of man who looked steady from a distance because he spoke softly and kept his shoes polished. We were together for 6 years. We broke up 6 months before the first IVF cycle because I discovered steadiness and cowardice can share a spine. There was someone else, not a dramatic affair, just enough deceit, spaced carefully over time, to make me doubt my own instincts more than his character. By the time that relationship ended, I was 34 and carrying the kind of exhaustion that looks from the outside like composure. I decided to try one round of IVF because I had the savings, the insurance coverage was partial, and I didn't want a man's collapse to decide my whole future. It felt less romantic than administrative, which probably says everything about the stage of life I was in. Consent forms, lab work, medication timing alarms at 6 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. payment plans, menus of risk, hope reduced to handwriting. The cycle failed, badly enough that my doctor was gentle from the moment she walked into the room. I went back to work too fast. 3 weeks later, I had a panic attack in a hospital stairwell after being asked a completely ordinary question by a resident. I took a 6-week medical leave because my doctor used the word depletion and my therapist used the phrase acute grief convergence, and I was too tired to argue with either of them. Almost nobody knew the full picture. My closest friend Tessa knew. My doctor knew. HR knew. My mother knew only because she insisted on bringing soup one Sunday and found a Fairmont reproductive medicine envelope on my entry table. She said nothing then. She just looked at it half a second too long. A week later she called and asked, with a brightness so artificial it made my neck tighten, "Why didn't you tell me you were going through all this?" I should have understood the danger right there. Concern was not a language my mother spoke, unless she wanted access to the information behind it. Instead, I let myself answer. That is one of the hardest things to explain to people who grew up with safer families. The vulnerability is not that you don't see the blade. It's that you spend years hoping this time it is really a hand. For a little while she behaved. She asked how I was sleeping. She dropped off lemon loaf from the bakery near her house. She sat in my kitchen and talked about neighbors, weather, the cost of hydrangeas, anything but the real subject, which somehow made it easier to believe she was trying. Then the smaller things started. One Saturday I came home and the stack of mail on my entry table was out of order. Not gone, just wrong. The Fairmont envelope from the prior billing cycle was missing. I told myself I had thrown it away. Then Luke called asking if I could look over a draft gift letter connected to the Truro property. He phrased it casually, but attached was a proposed distribution memo from an attorney I had never worked with. The memo described a potential future transfer of the Cape Cottage to Luke upon marriage, contingent on trustee approval and debt reconciliation. It was dated but unsigned. My mother had already written comments in the margin as if approval were merely a timing issue. I called her immediately. "That's not how the trust works," I said. Silence. Then the dish towel voice. "It was just a conversation. A lawyer does not draft a 2-page memo with contingencies for a conversation." "Nora, what attorney is this? It came through Vanessa's family. You don't need to sound so adversarial." I remember standing at my kitchen counter staring at the bowl where I kept spare keys and paper clips, feeling something cold move into place behind my ribs. "Did you ask another lawyer about trust property without telling me?" And there it was. Don't make this about you. When people say betrayal happens all at once, I think they mean the moment it becomes undeniable. The actual work of betrayal is usually repetitive. It trains you to override yourself. It teaches you to mistrust the part of your mind that notices pattern. One slight, then another, then a joke at your expense, then a document you were supposed to sign without reading, then a seat moved, then an omission explained badly. By the time the public humiliation arrives, the road to it has been paved for months. I saw the road piece by piece. At the menu tasting, Vanessa's mother, Claire, smiled at me over folded napkins and said, "You must be relieved Luke finally found someone uncomplicated." She said it kindly enough to force me into the labor of decoding whether it was intentional. Vanessa went rigid for half a second, then asked the server about wine pairings. Luke didn't correct anything. 2 weeks later I was asked to come early to the party venue because you're so good at details, and help check escort cards. When I saw the seating chart draft, I wasn't at the family table. I was at table 9 near the side windows with 2 distant cousins, Luke's college friend Derek, and an elderly neighbor who had once confused me with our babysitter. I texted Luke a photo and wrote, "I assume this is an error." He replied 3 hours later, "It's just logistics. Don't spiral." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I'll fix it." Don't spiral. 3 days after that, the trust statement for March arrived in my secure portal. I logged in on my lunch break and saw 3 charges that made my skin go hot. Langford House event deposit, $7,500. Greenstem floral design, $3,214.66. Mercer Jazz collective retainer, $1,860. All from the Peter Whitmore Family Trust operating account. At first I thought there had to be a coding error. The account was for trust expenses related to property maintenance, taxes, approved distributions, and my mother's allowed support. Not engagement orchids. Not a jazz trio. Not a downtown event venue. I called the corporate fiduciary contact listed on the statement, a woman named Rebecca Kim who never wasted syllables. "These are not authorized expenses," I said. There was a pause, paper movement, keyboard taps. They were submitted as temporary event advances related to beneficiary family hosting. "That's not a category. It is not one I recognize," she said carefully. "Who submitted them?" More keyboard. The card on file was used. Supporting notes indicate household celebration. Household celebration. Not grief. Not housing. Not medical support. Household celebration. I felt my father's voice in my memory so clearly it was almost physical. "Don't sign anything you couldn't defend in daylight." I asked Rebecca to send full documentation and place a review hold on non-routine disbursements pending trustee clarification. She didn't argue. That alone told me the charges were bad enough to worry a bank-trained stranger. I called Luke. No answer. I called my mother. She let it ring twice, then answered on speaker. I knew because I could hear kitchen sounds and Luke exhaling somewhere nearby. "Why did trust funds pay for your engagement party?" Silence. Then Luke, with infuriating calm, "Mom was entitled to support." "Not for this. It's a family event." "No. It is your private engagement dinner." My mother cut in. "You are taking such an ugly tone. Return the money." "Nora," Luke said, "for once in your life can you just let something be happy?" Those are the sentences selfish people use when they are caught. Happiness. Tone. Family. All fog. No fact. "I'm asking a factual question," I said. "Who authorized the payments?" My mother inhaled. "Don't make this about you." I hung up before I said something that would only help them paint me as unstable. That night I went through every trust file I had at home. Statements, distribution rules, prior emails. I printed the relevant sections and clipped them together with a binder clip from my desk. My father's pen lay beside the stack. I remember touching it and feeling embarrassed by how comforting that was. The next morning, I found the first piece of proof that made my stomach turn for a different reason. A petition had been filed in probate court to suspend my active authority as co-trustee pending review, filed by Diane Whitmore. Supporting basis: recent mental health instability and significant personal financial distress creating conflict and impaired judgment. Attached exhibits included a copy of a medical leave certification form from my hospital employer, a billing statement from Fairmont Reproductive Medicine, and a summary of outstanding personal debt. I read the first page 3 times because my eyes would not accept what they were seeing. The leave certification form had my doctor's name, my dates of leave, and a generic phrase about treatment for anxiety and grief. The fertility statement was the same one that had gone missing from my apartment. The debt summary included my clinic balance and one personal line of credit I had used after my father's care costs and my own treatment hit at the same time. Not one of those documents had been voluntarily given to my mother. My hand actually shook then. Not dramatically, just enough to make the page click against the table. I called the probate attorney who had handled my father's original trust setup, a woman named Sandra Hines. She was 62, exacting, and had once reduced a real estate broker to silence using nothing but page numbers. If I had one advantage in my family, it was that my father trusted adults who liked records more than feelings. Sandra listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question. Can you account for how they got the documents? My mother had access to my apartment building when she brought meals after my leave. She may have opened mail. The leave certification might have been in an insurance packet she saw at my place. Do you have the petition? Yes. Email it to me now. I did. An hour later, Sandra called back. They overreached. The standard for suspending a co-trustee is not your family's opinion of your emotional life. The use of private medical and financial materials, especially if improperly obtained, is ugly and potentially useful. Do not discuss substance with them by phone. Preserve everything. And Nora, yes, if they are willing to file this, they are willing to stage manage more than paperwork. That sentence stayed with me. And that was when I understood this had not formed in a week. It had been gathering around me for months. The missing envelope, the property memo, the altered seating chart, the gentle questions about my health, the pressure to sign routine papers without reading them, the trust charges mislabeled as household celebration, the timing of the petition a week before the engagement party. They weren't just being selfish, they were building a narrative. If they could make me look fragile, jealous, unstable, and financially messy, then every objection I raised about the trust could be folded into that story. I wouldn't be a co-trustee doing my job. I would be the bitter sister making trouble because she was single, sad, and spiraling. It was so neat I almost admired it. Almost. I took 2 practical steps that same day. First, on Sandra's advice, I sent a formal objection to the petition and requested an expedited accounting of the trust expenditures connected to the engagement event. We also asked the bank to require dual review on non-routine charges pending hearing. Sandra drafted, I reviewed, we filed. She copied the fiduciary contact and opposing counsel. No drama, just timestamps. Second, I decided I would still go to the engagement party. Tessa thought I was insane. We were sitting in her kitchen, drinking tea that had gone cold while rain hit the window in slow streaks. You have a live grenade in your purse, she said. Why would you voluntarily stand in a room with these people? Because if I don't go, they'll say I couldn't handle it. They'll say that anyway. I know. She stared at me for a long moment. Then why? I looked down at my hands. Because I'm done letting them narrate my absence too. That was the closest I got to admitting the real reason. A part of me still wanted to see whether anyone in that room would choose decency without being forced. Not my mother. I had stopped hoping for that. Not even Luke, if I am being honest. But someone. Anyone. When all your family stories cast you as the difficult one, public truth becomes strangely clarifying. You stop trying to win affection. You start wanting witnesses. The week before the party, Luke texted me 3 times as if nothing had happened. Can you look at the draft seating slide for the welcome screen? Mom says you still have Dad's pen. We wanted it for the guest book table. Please don't bring legal energy to Friday. That last one made me laugh out loud in my office. Legal energy. As if their petition had been moonlight. I replied only once. I'll keep the pen. He reacted with a thumbs up. My mother tried a different angle. She left me a voicemail at 9:14 p.m., the hour she preferred for emotional ambushes. Nora, sweetheart, I know you're upset. We all are. But Friday is important for Luke, and Vanessa's family is traditional. We need to show unity. Please don't make this into a scene. You know how people talk. Traditional. People. Unity. Every manipulative family develops a shared cloud of nouns it uses to avoid accountability. Ours like those 3 especially. On Thursday afternoon, a garment bag arrived at my apartment from my mother's housekeeper with a note clipped to the hanger. Wear this instead. Navy is more flattering than black. Inside was a floor-length dress I had not chosen and would not wear. There was nothing objectively wrong with it. That was the point. Controlling people rarely send you a costume that is obviously insulting. They send something plausible so your refusal can be called difficult. I hung it in the hall closet and wore my own dress the next night. Dark green silk, long sleeves, clean lines, simple enough to disappear if I wanted to and expensive enough not to look apologetic. I tucked my father's fountain pen into my black clutch beside the copies Sandra had prepared. The trust statement, the unauthorized vendor charges, the petition, my objection filing stamped by the court, and the trust clause governing distributions of principal assets. I did not go there planning to make a speech. I went there prepared not to be cornered. Langford House glowed from the street like the inside of a jewelry box. Valets in charcoal coats. Hosts stand with votive candles. A floral install over the staircase big enough to pay a month of someone's rent. I checked my coat and immediately saw the first signal of how the evening would go. The welcome board at the entrance said, "Celebrating Luke and Vanessa. Families joining, futures beginning." There were 2 photographs of the couple. None of the families. Fine. Then I walked into the main room and found that the escort cards were displayed on mirrored trays under a sign that read "Find Your Place." Mine was not with the Whitmores or the Hales. It had been moved again, now to table 11. My mother appeared at my elbow almost instantly, as if she had been waiting for my reaction. "You look tired," she said instead of hello. I picked up the card. I was at table 9 in the draft. "Oh honey, numbers changed. Don't make this about you." She said it lightly, with her hand already steering me by the arm toward the bar. I looked at her and saw, with a calmness that surprised me, that she fully expected the phrase to work forever. "Where is Luke?" I asked. "Floating." Of course he was. I took a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray because I didn't trust myself with wine and spent the next 20 minutes moving through that room the way you move through a museum wing you did not choose. Smile, nod, sidestep. Luke's friends hugged me with the too hard warmth of men who had heard something sensitive and wanted credit for sensitivity. Vanessa looked stunning and frightened in equal measure. She kissed my cheek and said, "I'm so glad you came." It was the kind of sentence that can mean 3 different things depending on who's saying it. With Vanessa, I couldn't tell whether it meant I'm relieved, I'm nervous, or please behave. Maybe all 3. Claire Hale kissed the air near my face and complimented my sleeves. Alan Hale, Vanessa's father, shook my hand like I was a colleague at a memorial service. "Nora," he said, "good to see you." He was tall, silver-haired, and had the expression of a man who believed all problems had a proper room for handling and that this was not it. I liked him immediately for reasons that would later become clearer. At table 11, Derek looked embarrassed on my behalf without saying so. The elderly neighbor told me my father would have been proud to see Luke settled. I thanked her because what else was there to do? During salads, I realized the guest book by the entrance had a fountain pen clipped beside it. Not my father's. A new one. Cheap imitation, black and gold. I almost laughed. They had wanted the object, not the meaning. That was my family in one image. By the time the main course was cleared, I had already noticed enough to understand the choreography. Luke had circulated table to table like a candidate. My mother had been working the room with a level of brightness she only reached when she needed other people to confirm her version of events. Vanessa had gone to the restroom twice in under an hour. Claire kept touching her wrist. Alan drank very little. There was tension, but the kind trained families call excitement. Then the toasts began. Claire went first. It was polished and harmless. She welcomed Luke warmly, referenced values and partnership and the joy of expanding family. My mother cried at the appropriate line about Peter being missed. People dabbed at their eyes. Silverware rested. Candles moved in the draft from the service door. Then Luke stood. He thanked everyone for coming. He thanked the Hales for embracing the beautiful mess of us. There was laughter. He thanked our mother for her strength. More laughter, softer this time. Then his tone shifted only slightly. "And because tonight is about honesty and beginnings," he said, "I think it's fair to clear the air on something." I remember every next second too clearly. He looked at me. My stomach did not drop. It hardened. "Nora has had a very hard year," he said. "And sometimes when people are struggling, they misread support as control. They misread family decisions as attacks." A few guests turned. Not all. Just enough. He smiled, sympathetic and deadly. "She has been upset about the trust, about finances, about basically everything, And I know some of you have probably sensed tension. I'd rather be compassionate than let gossip fill in the blanks. Then he opened the envelope. I heard someone inhale. He held up the Fairmont bill first. "This," he said, giving a little shrug that made my skin crawl, "is the kind of pressure she's under." A rustle went through the room. Not loud. Worse. The intimate sound of people realizing they are about to witness something indecent and staying seated anyway. He pulled out the medical leave form next. "And we've all been trying to protect her." Protect me. My mother lowered her eyes in performative grief. I could actually see the yellow highlighter line across the invoice balance from where I sat. Luke kept going. "So if she has said or implied that Mom and I did something improper with Dad's estate, I just want everyone here to know that this is really about grief, debt, jealousy, and the fact that not everyone handles being left behind the same way." There it was. Not just humiliation. Narrative. Single sister. Failed treatments. Mental health leave. Debt. Jealousy. Built for maximum social efficiency. Derek stared at his plate. The neighbor froze with her napkin halfway to her mouth. Someone near the windows whispered, "Jesus." Vanessa had gone pale enough that even her blush no longer showed. And my mother said the phrase, quietly, but I heard it. "Please, Nora. Don't make this about you." That was the moment a chair scraped hard against the floor. Alan Hale stood up. The sound cut through the room more sharply than the microphone had. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His face had changed from polite host to something colder, older, more absolute. "Luke," he said, "put that paper down." The room stopped moving. Luke laughed once too high. "Alan, it's okay. Family stuff." "No," Alan said. "It is not okay. It is grotesque." The word landed like a dropped glass. Claire whispered his name, mortified. Vanessa looked from her father to Luke to me with the expression of someone watching a floor give way under expensive shoes. Luke, cornered but too arrogant to know it, made the worst decision of his life. "With respect," he said, smiling again, "you don't know the whole situation." He was right. Alan didn't. I did. I stood then, not fast. I remember smoothing the front of my dress once with my palm. I picked up my clutch. I could feel every eye in the room now, but what surprised me was how little heat I felt from it. Public shame only works if you still agree to carry it. "I do know the situation," I said. I didn't ask for the microphone. I didn't need amplification. Silence does half the work when people are desperate to hear what comes next. Luke still had the papers in his hand. I looked directly at them, then at my mother. "You didn't expose me," I said. "You exposed what you had to steal in order to control me." That was the quiet line that finally made her flinch. Not because it was loud, because it was accurate. I opened my clutch and took out the first document. My objection filing, court-stamped that afternoon. Then the trust statement. Then the petition. My father's pen was cool against my fingers as I pulled the stack free. "Since we're clarifying," I said, and I turned toward the room rather than just toward them. "The trust my father created for my mother's support paid for this venue, these flowers, and the band. Those charges were submitted as household celebration expenses from an account that does not belong to my brother." I held up the statement just high enough to make clear it existed, not high enough to perform. Alan took one step closer. Vanessa whispered, "What?" Luke's face lost color in a rush. "That's not." "It is," I said. Then I looked at Vanessa, because truth owes something to the innocent when it arrives. "The Cape Cottage your fiancé has been discussing as a wedding property is also held in that trust," I said. "It cannot be gifted to him without approval that was never granted." My mother stood up too fast, knocking her chair into the tablecloth. Glass rattled. "Nora," she hissed, all softness gone. "Stop." I turned to her. "You filed a probate petition last Tuesday to suspend my trustee authority, using private medical records taken from my mail, and leave documents you had no right to possess." Around us, the room began to fracture into whispers. Vanessa looked at her mother, then at Luke. "Is that true?" Claire, who had looked offended on moral grounds a minute earlier, now looked offended on class grounds, which in her world was far more destabilizing. She hissed something at Luke I couldn't hear. My mother tried one last time to seize the tone. "She is not well. This is exactly the problem. She turns every family event into documentation?" I asked. The words were gentle enough to be devastating. Luke actually took a step toward me then, like proximity could still work. You have always resented me. There it was, the oldest lie in the house. I looked at him and thought of the tax bill I had covered, the rehab appointments, the way I had sat outside his room when he was 12, the dozens of forms I had filled out after Dad's stroke while Luke sent heart emojis into family chats and called it support. No, I said. I resented being useful only when I was silent. That hit harder than any accusation could have. Sandra had told me beforehand not to over-explain in public. Facts, not emotion. State what matters. Do not argue. Leave. So I did. My attorney filed an objection this afternoon, I said. The bank has been notified. Any further communication about the trust goes through counsel. As for the rest of this, I glanced once at the papers in Luke's hand. If either of you contact me about my medical information again, I will treat it accordingly. I didn't say the words privacy claim. I didn't need to. Adults in rooms like that hear legal consequences even when you hand them only the outline. Then I turned to Vanessa. I'm sorry this happened at your engagement party, I said. And I meant it more than she deserved or didn't deserve. But I won't stand here while my private life is used to make theft look like family concern. Alan held out his hand slightly, not to take the documents, but as if making space. Luke's voice cracked. You're ruining this. I looked at him one last time. No, Luke. I'm refusing my role in it. That was the whole revenge, if you want the truth. Not the documents. Not the room going silent. Not even the expression spreading around the tables as people recalculated everything they had just witnessed. It was that sentence. The moment I understood, I did not have to remain available for their version of me. I put the papers back in my clutch, kept only the trust statement, and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. The jazz trio stood frozen near the bar, instruments in hand. A server stared at the floor. Derek half rose from his chair like he wanted to say something, then sat again. My mother called my name once in that warning tone that had governed my childhood. I didn't turn around. The only thing I did before I left the room was pause beside Alan Hale. He was still standing. I'm sorry, he said quietly. It was the first correct sentence anyone in either family had said to me that night. I nodded once and walked out. I cried in the coat room. Not dramatically. Not even for long. Just enough for the pressure in my chest to move somewhere else. The attendant, a woman maybe 10 years younger than I was, handed me tissues without asking questions. The kindness nearly undid me more than the betrayal had. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. I stood under the awning waiting for my ride, and my phone started vibrating before the car had even turned onto the street. Luke, decline. Mother, decline. Luke again. Then 3 texts in a row. What the hell is wrong with you? You could have discussed this privately. You always need an audience. I laughed once out loud, there on the sidewalk under expensive flowers paid for by stolen trust funds. Always need an audience. From the man who had just held up my fertility bill under a microphone. My car arrived. I got in. The driver asked if I wanted the window up. I said yes and watched Langford House recede in the glass like a set someone would dismantle by morning. By the time I got home, there were 14 missed calls and 2 voicemails. I listened to neither. I showered, hung up the green dress, set my father's pen on the bathroom counter while I washed my face, then carried it with me to the kitchen and put it beside the court papers. I made tea I didn't drink. At 1:13 a.m., my mother sent the first of what would become many messages. You have damaged this family in a way that may not be reparable. I stared at that text for a long time. There are sentences that accidentally tell the truth. She did not say you are hurt. She did not say I am sorry. She did not say we need to talk about what happened. She said I had damaged the family, meaning the image, meaning the arrangement, meaning the system in which my labor was owed and my privacy was available. At 1:47 a.m., Luke left a voicemail. I didn't hear it until the next morning. He sounded drunk and furious and frightened in no particular order. You think you're so smart with your documents, he said. You humiliated Mom. Vanessa's father is acting like I committed a crime. You blew up my engagement because you couldn't stand not being the center of something for once. I saved the voicemail. Not for revenge, for memory. When you grow up in a family that rewrites events in real time, records become oxygen. Saturday morning, Sandra emailed me at 7:12 a.m. Do not engage directly. Opposing counsel requested extension to respond. Also, I suggest preserving the voicemail and all written communications from last night. We may want the timeline. At 8:03, Tessa arrived with coffee and egg sandwiches and did not say I told you so even though she had earned the right. She sat at my kitchen table while I played the voicemail on speaker and read her the texts. She said very carefully, "Are you okay?" And because I was too tired for self-deception, I told the truth. "No," I said. "But I'm clear." That was new for me. Hurt without confusion. Grief without negotiation. By noon, the extended family had chosen sides in the predictable pattern. The cousins who liked access stayed vague and urged peace. One aunt called to say my mother was beside herself, and that maybe I could apologize for the timing while still making my point later. A second cousin texted, "I know Luke was out of line, but you know how weddings are." As if weddings were natural disasters with documented exceptions for theft and privacy violations. Then came the late-night diplomacy messages from people who never do real intervention but love being adjacent to it. You only get one family. Be the bigger person. Don't let money ruin relationships. That last one made me put my phone face down and walk away from it entirely. Money had not ruined the relationships. Entitlement had. Access had. The assumption that I would absorb any level of violation because doing otherwise would be dramatic. Around 3 in the afternoon, Vanessa emailed me. Not texted. Emailed. Subject line, "I am sorry." The body was 7 sentences. No flourishes. No defensiveness. "Nora, I didn't know about the medical documents or the petition. I knew there was tension around the trust, but Luke framed it as administrative conflict and grief. I should have asked more questions when things felt off and I didn't. I am sorry for what happened to you in that room. My father has asked for all event invoices and any information related to the trust charges. I understand if you never want to hear from me again. You did not deserve last night." I read it twice, then once more. It did not absolve her, but it was adult language. It recognized harm without centering her own discomfort. That alone made it rare. I forwarded it to Sandra and replied only, "Thank you for the acknowledgement. Please direct any trust-related documents to counsel." I knew better than to let apology reopen intimacy. That weekend, more facts surfaced, and each one made the picture uglier. Langford House sent a revised invoice after Alan Hale requested the billing chain. The deposit had been paid from the trust card. The final balance, due after the party, had been scheduled to hit a Hale family account because Claire had assumed Luke's side was covering decor and music. In other words, my mother and Luke had split the costs strategically, using the trust for what they thought would be hardest to trace without full event paperwork. Greenstem Floral had my mother listed as approving contact. Mercer Jazz Collective had Luke's email and the trust card number. There was also, somehow even more infuriatingly, a $420 line item for custom escort card calligraphy after they had pulled me in to help with details for free. Sandra filed an amended request for accounting Monday morning. The bank froze discretionary distributions pending review. The corporate fiduciary asked for copies of every non-routine invoice from the previous 6 months. That was when Luke started panicking. He called from unknown numbers. He emailed from an account I had forgotten he still used. He sent one text that said, "This has gone way beyond what it needed to be," which is how selfish people describe consequences they can't charm away. My mother tried the grief route. I found a handwritten note slipped under my apartment door Wednesday night. No stamp. Just my name on the front in her sharp slanted handwriting. Inside, "I know you are angry, but your father would be devastated by this level of public cruelty. I made choices under pressure. Luke is starting a life. I needed flexibility. You have always been so rigid about documents and rules that you miss the heart of things. Families forgive. Call me and let's end this. No apology for the medical records. No explanation for the petition. No remorse for the room. Just flexibility. Heart. Forgive." I sat at my kitchen table with the note and my father's pen and felt something in me settle permanently. It wasn't rage. Rage still wants something from the other person. It was recognition. My mother did not see my life as separate from her needs. Luke did not see my privacy as separate from his goals. The family system had room for me only as long as I remained useful, discreet, and absorbent. That is not misunderstanding. That is structure. I wrote nothing back. Instead, I asked Sandra to draft a formal communication protocol. Trust matters through counsel only. No visits to my apartment, no access.